how high should you draft Victor Wembanyama in fantasy basketball? We're going to cover that and all of the stuff for the Spurs for the upcoming season. Michael Bolton.
Let's get it on, Gilly.
That's not Michael Bolton. This one is.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by Jase Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jase case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics to treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jasemedical.com. That's Jase medical.com. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and we are available on all platforms. So we're going to talk Spurs, and I teased at the start we're going to talk about Victor Wembanyama, but honestly, he's not going to be the major focus of this show. We'll talk about him, we'll talk about every player on this roster, because I'm not sure there's a huge amount of interest, or there's not as many interesting things with him for fantasy. I know that sounds ridiculous, and you'll have to hear about it when I talk about it later, but I'm interested to see how people view him for the upcoming season as well. But quickly, Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl, an update if you want in. There's spots left. Fill out the application form. It's down below in the show notes on audio and in the description on YouTube. There will be a question to answer later on that drops you in there. We have filled more spots already than we had last season for head-to-head categories. We're well above last year's number. We were aiming to double it. I think we're going to get there. We'll see how we go. Put your entry in, $50 entry. The more people that enter, the bigger the final prize pool as well. You get $200 back if you make it through to the final Battle Royale round. So that is the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl. Let's talk San Antonio Spurs. Well, I've already dropped a warning, but maybe we'll drop another one.
Let's get it on, Gilly.
All right. The schedule for the Spurs. They have 44 quality games, which is more than you see for bad teams because there's Victor Wembanyama, meaning there's lots more national TV sort of appearances for the Spurs. They have 13 back-to-backs. That's great. They're 13 in terms of their maximum game weeks. That's not ideal, but it's not a big deal. And their playoff schedule's all right. 3-4-3 for 24th of March. 4-3-4 for the 31st of March. That's a max week there, or a max slate. 3-4-3 for 7th of April and 4-3-4 for 14th of April. The good part about the lower back-to-backs there is we do expect there to be significant load management on Victor Wembanyama. He does not have to play 65 games to qualify for Rookie of the Year or Rookie Team. That is not one of the awards that rule is counted for, and it would behoove the San Antonio Spurs to ease Wembanyama in terms of just, this is an investment for 2030, not 2023. And he played a full season last year, but that was like 2 to 3 games max a week. So I would expect if he hits 65, I'm actually going to be relatively surprised. And that's going to lead to, I guess, some concerns for him regarding fantasy. And he's not someone who's going to be a big focus of this show, as I said. So I'll just quickly talk about Wembanyama now. And his value's a little bit all over the place. He's got a ranking on Yahoo of 38, reasonable. An ADP of 30 on Fantrax, 31 on Yahoo, reasonable. An ESPN head-to-head rank of 44, absolutely reasonable. An ADP of 26, though, is pushing it a little bit high. And then for points leagues on ESPN, he's ranked at 35. I thought, and originally he was ranked 18th on ESPN, which is crazy. But that's fine. It's not often you get top 30 fantasy rookies. This is not a normal fantasy rookie, though. And I feel good in saying that I think that he is going to hit Wembanyama as a top 30 per game player, but almost definitely won't approach that with totals. And we have that sort of baked into what he can do. I think there's also going to be some significant issues with him with his field goal percentage. And he probably isn't going to be a 20-point scorer as a rookie, but 17 and 9, he could average 2.7 blocks, a steal, 2.5, 3 assists. He's going to be, I believe, the number one player in fantasy in 7 years' time. It'll be him or Cooper Flagg would be my guess in 7 years' time when talking dynasty. I think he's going to be awesome. But there is some risk in taking him. I would not take him in round 3. If he's available towards the back end of round 4, that's when I'd start considering it for Wembanyama, but I wouldn't go too much higher than that just because of the risk of rookies and adjustments and load management and I think some shooting concerns as well. That's part of my issue there with Wemby. I also think he's going to do so much unbelievable stuff defensively. It's going to be silly. I think he's going to live up to the hype in that regard. He's going to be awesome. But I just would be very cautious about where I drafted him in fantasy. What are the pressure points? Well, the number one thing I think is what happens with the starting 5. I am very much on record that the Spurs should bring Keldon Johnson off the bench. I have given my reasoning for that in terms of what he is as a player. I don't care that he's their highest paid player. That's more timing than anything. I just think that he is a guy that, give you a nice little bench scoring burst player, but struggles at times with defense, with shooting efficiency, with ball movement, not great at any of those things. And I just don't think he's a guy that you want to be building around. There's other players in his position. I've said all of that. You've heard it plenty of times, and many of you will disagree. There are people out here who watch Keldon Johnson and watch the Spurs who think that he's going to be better this coming year. There's not for the life of me do I see that. Okay, but this is the thing: is I don't know what the Spurs are going to do. I don't know what they're going. There's 6 players for 5 starting spots. Now, all 6 of those guys are going to start games because players are going to sit plenty of times throughout the year, and the injuries are going to strike. All of that stuff. But it's more about what's your floor as a full-time starter, as a 32-minute-a-night floor, or as a bench guy with a floor of maybe 29. That is a difference. Part of the reason that... No, not part. The reason that I believe Keldon Johnson is going to come off the bench is... should come off the bench is because that's how I view him as a player. The reason I think he will come off the bench is because the fact that he came out in an interview and said, yeah, I'd be happy to come off the bench. That, to me, suggests that he's been told, bro, you're probably going to come off the bench. Or there's a chance you're going to come off the bench. Or we think your best role is coming off the bench or whatever. But the fact that he came out and said that in that interview suggests that this is... at the very least, you can't say that there's no hope, no chance that Keldon comes off the bench. I think that if you had that mindset, you need to remove that mindset that there is no hope that the horse comes off the bench.
Whose horse is that?
Because I would say it is definitely in play, and somebody needs to come off the bench. And it's not Vassell, and it's not Wembanyama, and it's not Zach Collins. So it's one of Trey Jones, Jeremy Sochan, or Keldon Johnson. But that impacts a lot in projections. The other thing is tanking. Are they going to tank again? I don't know. They were good early on in the season, and then they really started getting wacky in January. Now, obviously, the prospect level is not as good in this season, and once you get a prospect like Wembanyama, it's actually really hard to be that bad. It continued. We saw it with guys like Anthony Davis. You saw it with Luka Doncic. They make the team too good too early. And I think that's possible here as well. Yes, getting an Alex Sarr to play next to Wembanyama would be amazing. Getting a Ron Holland to play next to him would be pretty good as well. There are good players in this draft. One of the point guards, Isaiah Collier. Would that make sense? Yeah, he's a little bit small, but maybe. Right? There are options. So I can see them doing that, especially March, April. But I don't think it's going to be as extreme as it was last season. And the other thing is, what do they actually think Sohan is? Because to me, Sohan, when he came into the season last season, was a forward. He was a small forward, power forward with really good defensive ability. And then they came in and said, actually, we can actually run him as a point guard. I went, all right, that's interesting. And then he looked good doing it. I don't think they're going to commit to him full-time as a point guard. I think they'd have similar issues to the full-time point guard issues that we've seen at times with Scott Barnes up in Toronto. But they could do that, and that would bring Trey Jones off the bench and keep Keldon starting. And it's a possibility. It's stuff that can happen that we just, at this point, don't know, and preseason is going to give us a really good idea of how that all plays out. Today's episode is brought to you by Jase Medical, in particular, the Jase case, which is created by doctors and recommended by doctors. What is it? It is a case, that's the name, provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. And all it takes to get it, fill out a simple online form, you have a chat with their board-certified physicians, you discuss things with them all the way through and after you get your Jase case as well, and then you get it. It's so you don't get caught unprepared. You don't want to use a Jase case. I don't want you to use a Jase case, but I want you to have it. Because sometimes you're in situations, the worst thing happens, a natural disaster, an earthquake, half your house collapses, half your house burns down. You can't get to a hospital. There's a pandemic. Remember those? Some would have sort of wind-based or rain-based issue, flood, hurricane, cyclone, tornado. And sometimes you just need these things on hand. That's what Jace case is. And you can get $20 off these life-saving antibiotics today from Jase Medical by using the code LOCKEDON at checkout at jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. So who are the breakout candidates on this team? Guys that have a real shot to blow up and outperform projections. I think one of those has to be the man that we're going to take under the lens soon, and that is Devin Vassell. I'll talk more about him later, but I do think that he's got a significant chance to jump up ahead of where he's been projected, and I'll try to be relatively cautious on his projection. The other one is Jeremy Sochan.
Sohan now!
Now, Sohan is ranked at a ludicrous 325 on Yahoo. That's obviously insane. He's got an ADP of 142. He's at 140 on Fantrax. He's 140 on ESPN. I think he's going to be better than that. I think that's just too low. And I'm not super aggressive on his projection this season. Of course, that could all change depending on what happens with Sohan and whether he comes off the bench or not. Like last season, he ended up playing only 26 minutes a night. He averaged 11 points, 5 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 0.8 steals, shot 45 and 70. Not particularly good. But I would expect a lot to improve there for Sohan this season. Yeah, could he average 31 minutes? Could he get 15 points, 7 rebounds? Maybe not 7 playing at small forward. 3.5 assists, 1.2 steals. Could he shoot 74 from the line? I guess so, because he started off so poorly and then went to that one-handed shot and improved a lot, so I expect that to jump up. I think that it's very easy to see how he improves from where projections sit him. Second-year player, a lot of faith in him from the organization. I think there is a lot that can actually go on with him. That does bring us, though, to Devin Vassell, and as we put him under the lens. Really is a tale of sort of two halves of the season for Vassell. On a per-game basis, the numbers are all reasonable. He was a guy that I was really big on last season, and I maintained, and I still maintain, that he is the best player on this team until Victor actually takes the court. He was 77th in per-game value for Yahoo. He was 74th in ESPN points. He was 89th in -1 head-to-head numbers. He only played 38 games, though. He played only 31 minutes. He averaged 18.5 points, almost 3 threes, 4 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 1.1 steals, shot 44 and 78 from the field, which included 39% on threes. There's plenty of room for that to get better. And you'll see that his rankings and ADPs are probably in the right spot outside of an absolutely insane 120 ADP on ESPN, which makes no sense. He's ranked 64th on ESPN. He's ranked 66th on Yahoo. He's got an ADP of 80 on Fantrax, but it's not outrageous to suggest that he's a top 50 player. Don't draft him there. That's not what I'm saying he is. That's what I'm saying he could get to. There's a lot of stuff to iron out there. And as we look, his field goal percentage dropped as the season went on. But when I say tale of two seasons, he got hurt week 12, had the knee surgery and came back, and then he was in and out of the lineup as part of their player preservation policy, the old triple P, different to the player participation policy. So it's really hard to read into that second half of the year. The efficiency for him is a concern. The 2-point percentage was down under 50%. That's his big room for growth. He already hit his threes at a nice rate and took a lot of them. But he's got to be a 55% 2-point guy, really up that efficiency to become a sub-all-star level player. It's year 4 for Vassell. It's really time to make that move. We'll see whether it happens. He barely played as a rookie, as so many Spurs have. Stepped up year 2. I thought it was pretty good last season, and he's got another level to go this season. I'm very excited to see where he goes. But I'm also not going overly aggressive on drafting him. One thing that improved a lot for him last season was ball handling and assists. And you'll see that he's had quite a few double-digit assist weeks. A couple of bad weeks there, and obviously towards the end of the season we ignored a lot of that. But 10, 10, 11, 10, that's what, a 3, 9, 12, 10 in assists. It's pretty good, right? For a guy that was never really considered an initiator or a ball handler. To be able to up that is impressive, and I think there's a little bit more in that to come. What also was interesting to me was his usage rate, which had some peaks at 27, but sat around the 24, 23 mark. And his overall usage for the season, Vassell, sat at 24.7, in contrast to Keldon Johnson's 28.1. So we did see some of that drop off, and Keldon did jump up in usage when Vassell was hurt also. I think Vassell is able to maintain a 27 usage as a regular thing. Whether that happens this season, I'm not sure, but I think he can maintain that. But there was some fluctuation in his role during the season, and it did start to drop. I'd like that to stabilize. Part of the reason why I'm not ranking him super, super high this season. His -1 rank, we get the illustration early. Yeah, some rough weeks for sure, but multiple top 100 weeks, some value there, a top 50 week. It doesn't paint a perfect picture at all. And again, the end of the season, we forget about nearly all of that. That's where he was hurt and barely playing. But there's some interesting stuff there in terms of some inconsistency, but also some stability across that nice 4 or 5 week period. I do think that in certain situations, ESPN ADP, he's being underrated, but you do have to worry that maybe he gets pushed too high. And I'm not going to fall into that trap. It is a little concerning to see his Darko graph. This is not to say that he was negative as a player, but it was to say that over the course of the end of year 2 and all of year 3, his Darko numbers dropped. He was on the downward slope. I would want my year 3 player, who I hope can be a really top-end guy, to be improving or at least holding still, not dropping off. Is part of that the environment he was in? Chopping and changing rotations, intentionally losing, being forced into a number 1A or 1B role, probably number 2 behind Keldon, that maybe doesn't suit him. Again, while I am a huge Vassell fan, and I do think he's their best player, there are red flags. The usage drop, the field goal percentage inefficiency, the Darko drop, that is all why I'm a little cautious about where we need to draft him. I still really like him. What I do want to point to as a really big positive, though, for Vassell is we go to the Basketball Index headshot, and I want to talk about him actually running an offense. I've got on this graph Zach LaVine. I've got teammate Keldon Johnson. There's Devin Vassell and Jalen Green. Guys who are 2/3s who have established themselves as ball handlers. Keldon was the number 1 usage guy in the Spurs, and Jalen Green showed a little bit more pick and roll stuff. So we've got 2 numbers here. The stable pick and roll ball handler points per possession percentile. So when you are the pick and roll ball handler, what's your team scoring per possession? And the other one is how much of the time will you run on ball? Vassell is that one on the very far right of screen because he is in the 97th percentile for points per possession as a pick and roll ball handler. And when there's one thing you think about with Devin Vassell, it is definitely not elite pick and roll ball handler, but he was. That's the thing, is if they start leaning into him as that offensive initiator type player who runs pick and rolls with not Jakob Poeltl, not Charles Bassey, not Jeremy Sochan, but Victor Wembanyama, yeah, I'm pretty excited about what that means. So he was already awesome, and now he's got the opportunity to run pick and rolls with Wemby. Yeah, that's pretty good. The other thing to watch here is that I've got Keldon Johnson there, who was only, he's 87th in pick and roll ball handling percentage. That's pretty good. I didn't expect him to be that good. Vassell's higher than LaVine and significantly higher than Jalen Green. But in saying all of that, Green and LaVine, didn't mean for that to rhyme, but those guys spent a lot more time on ball. Vassell's around 73rd percentile, Keldon's around 70th percentile, and Green's at 81, and LaVine's around 79. The other thing that is interesting here is that Vassell was really strong initiating pick and roll, and he had the ball, he was on ball more than Keldon was. So Keldon was used more as a play finisher, which is a part of my reason, again, for some skepticism around him. Because if the guy that's doing a lot of the initiating and is more effective at the initiating, which Vassell is, and Keldon was working a lot as a finisher, well, that finishing will get taken away a lot by Wembanyama. And that's where I have some concerns of Keldon maintaining that 28 usage and the 20 points per game that he scored, is that he was not as on ball as even a Devin Vassell. And again, I think my thought coming into looking at this is that Keldon would have been on ball more than Vassell. I also thought he'd be a worse ball handler than he was in terms of pick and roll, but he was okay. He wasn't great, but he was okay. It's pretty good. So that's where it's sort of like a deep dive almost into Vassell and into Keldon here, where the faith in Vassell is like, oh, look how good he is on pick and roll. The ball's in his hand a little bit, but now he gets to run it with Vic, and maybe Keldon's role as a finisher gets reduced. Just some concerns there, I think, that you can argue about whether Vassell or Keldon is better and Keldon's going to start and how good he is and all that sort of stuff, but I don't think you can argue that at least you've got to have some level of question mark about it. So, who's a sleeper? I'm going with Zach Collins. I would be stunned at this point if Zach Collins doesn't start for the Spurs. He's going to start at center. And last season, once Jakob Poeltl was traded, he was a top 50 guy. Now, the scenario around that's very different. He suffered that like big hand laceration end of year. There was some bullshit but that was a serious injury. And there was Keldon in and Vassell out. They're all in and out of the lineup, or Sohan in and out. It was a weird situation. But what we saw last season is Jakob Poeltl became an offensive hub as a passer. He was gone, and Zach Collins just moved straight into that role and did the same thing. So he's able to boost with his ball handling. He's going to start. He's going to have block opportunities and rebound opportunities taken away by Victor Wembanyama, absolutely. But I think there's some definite value still here. Now, it's not everywhere, and this is where it's all contextual. He's ranked now, in their recent update, 104 on Yahoo. That's bang on, right? That's not value. That's not terrible. That's just not a sleeper anymore. But his ADP still sits at 124, and I like that. His Fantrax ADP at 120 is still really good. And on ESPN categories, he's up to 104. Again, spot on. But he's ranked 189th on their points league list. Crazy. That's unbelievable value. And his ADP is at 139. So it really depends on how your draft's going. If you're getting him at 100, I think you're fine, and maybe you can get 10 spots out of that. Maybe. If you're getting him at 180, like that's ridiculous. If you're getting him at 120, it's brilliant. If you're getting him at 140, it's awesome. So there is value here in Zach. And of course, when you're drafting him at that point of the draft, what are you losing out on? I think there's just a lot to like from what Zach Collins can do for this upcoming season, because he is going to start next to Victor Wembanyama. Part of the concern, I guess, I have with Zach, and why I haven't suggested he's a top 50 player, because I don't believe that he is that Wembanyama will play some center, and there is two very capable backups in Charles Bassey and Dom Barlow, and there is still Kem Birch and Sandro Mamukelashvili. Now, this team has got too many players, and I do think that Birch and Mamu might get cut. They might need to work trades for Bullock or McDermott or whatever type of stuff. But at the moment, I think Birch and Mamu are going to get cut. But there's a lot of capable backup centers. To go on Collins, the final month of the season, last 10 games, 18 points, 2 threes, 8 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 1.3 blocks, 52 and 80 in 28 minutes. I would say that maybe the 8 rebounds is high, but 18, 8, 3.5, 2 threes, 0.9 steals, 1.3 blocks, 52 and 80. That's actually all 100% repeatable, and that's a top 40 player. So that's why I love taking him. And now you get a chance again to enter the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl. Let's do it on Zach Collins. What did Zach Collins shoot from the field over the final 10 games of the season? And the answer there is 52.2. 52.2 is the answer that you put onto that sheet regarding the secret question. That's Zach Collins' field goal percentage for the final 10 games of the season. Who is a bust? I think it's Keldon. And again, as I will always explain to you guys, understand the source of the information you're getting. Understand my position on Keldon. I think he's a subpar defender who's not a very good shooter, not a great ball mover, who was put into a position to be the number one usage guy, and that's just not going to be his role. Plus, I think he's going to come off the bench. But all of those things might be untrue. Maybe he is a guy that develops a reliable three-point shot. Maybe he becomes a good free throw shooter. Maybe he does more than put his head down and drive. Maybe he becomes a facilitator. Maybe he becomes a guy that gets defensive stats. That one, I would say there's no hope. He's never did it in college. He's never done it in the NBA. But I'm just out on him. But again, it's always going to depend on context, because he's ranked at 156 on Yahoo. I love that. Take him with your last pick. No worries. Let's see what happens. Let's see how the horse goes. But he's got an ADP of 109, and under no circumstance am I taking him in round 9 of a category league draft. In a points league, I might consider that. I think that's about bang on. His Fantrax ADP at 117 for category leagues, probably still too high. His rank on ESPN for category leagues at 149 is also perfect. I love it. But then we get to, why is he ranked 71st in points leagues? Why is his ADP 87 on ESPN points leagues? For reference, Zach Collins was 86th in ESPN points leagues last season, averaging 31. So we're expecting a significant rise for him to get to that number. That is close to one of the biggest busts on the board. I talked about Vassell earlier on ESPN, by the way, where he had an ADP of 120, which is clearly insane as well. So I would switch those around. Keldon 120, Vassell 71 or 80 or whatever this number is. So bust is always a very relative term. At the end of last season, the Spurs had a lot of fake injuries. The one that was actually real was Vassell. He had knee surgery for it. He came back. He probably could have played more games. But I wouldn't worry about the Johnson foot. I wouldn't worry about Sohan, whatever his knee issue was. I wouldn't worry about Collins' hand. Everyone seems ready to go. But they will be missing Devontae Graham. This team actually is one of those teams where you go, he plays there. Yeah, Devontae Graham plays for this team. He's got a 2-game suspension to start the season. He probably will be their backup point guard now that they cut campaign. But he's obviously not going to be any sort of fantasy option for us. What's a trade option for this team? I think they should trade Keldon. I don't think they would, but they should trade him and get a point guard. They need a real point guard. Trade him and get Emmanuel quickly would be what I'd be doing. The Knicks would love him. He played for Kentucky. I don't know that happens. But that is... Okay, they're not trading Vassell. They might trade Collins, but nothing getting back there. They're not trading Sohan. There's no value in Trey Jones. It's probably guys like McDermott or Bullock who are going to be traded. If we're going to talk big options, Keldon would be someone that I would watch. Good teams do want him because he fills a nice bench role for them. Josh, you're a Keldon Johnson hater. Yeah, sure, I am. Contract year. Vassell is a restricted free agent, and then Collins, Bullock, and McDermott are all unrestricteds. What happens with Bullock and McDermott here are key because they're obviously good enough to be in the rotation, but they're also going to take minutes away from Sohan or Johnson, whoever comes off the bench there, and how they run things with their Branhams and players like that, or CD Sissoko, whether he gets minutes. I don't know how both Bullock and McDermott play in the regular every night rotation, and we definitely don't care about them for fantasy. The other one there is Zach. Do they work on an extension? Are they going to bring him back? Or do they say, well, maybe let's see what Don Barlow can do? Really big on Don Barlow, by the way, long term. Maybe we can see what Goldfinger Charlie Bassey can do. Really big on him as well. And I would think that even if Zach Collins, if they did just move on from him, that starting Barlow and Victor Wembanyama would work. Starting Bassey and Wembanyama would work. So that's something to watch as well. The rotation risks here are Keldon, Sohan, and Trey. Which one of those guys off the bench, which one starts? Can Sohan be a full-time point guard? Trey Jones' value is solidified a little bit with the absence or the cutting of campaign. But when they re-signed Trey Jones, they signed him to one of the most obvious backup point guard contracts in the NBA. It's like 2 years, $20 million or whatever it was. That's backup point guard money. He's solid enough. He's got very little upside, in my opinion. He's a pretty good assist player. He'll score okay. Yeah, he's fine in that exact range where he is. Although he's ADP at 110 on Yahoo, Trey Jones, I think he's actually pretty good value. But yeah, ranked 91 on Yahoo, 92 on ESPN, totally okay. Very limited upside, but currently looks like a starting point guard unless we hear they start Sohan a point guard. But if you're looking at Trey Jones long-term for Dynasty, I don't think you should factor him very highly. I don't think that he is any sort of long-term starting point guard. The other one to watch is a guy who really did step up towards the end of last season. That's Malachi Branham. But how did he step up? Well, it was because everyone was out. And again, with Jones, Vassell, Johnson, even Graham, where does Branham fit? He probably plays 21 minutes a night, but realistically, to be a useful category league player, he needs the ball in his hands a lot, and he needs a lot of minutes. His numbers, again, for a rookie in the 20s were pretty strong. He's only 20 years old as well. 24 minutes, 10 points, 2 assists, 44 and 83. He shot only 30% from 3. That was part of his problem at Ohio State as well. It's just low volume of 3s. But the peripherals there aren't awesome. He did, at least his volume wasn't too bad. 1.2 threes in 23 minutes is not bad. But how does he take that gigantic step forward? Because you would think a guy that got prioritized down the stretch of season in year 2 would be able to get a large role. But Jones, Vassell, they're going to be ahead of him. So could he be a 27-minute-a-night sixth man? I guess it's possible. But we play the 240 game, and he's got to be at the very, very best case, the 7th man in the rotation. Very best case. And his game does not strictly look like a fantastic per-minute sort of player. But maybe they just do give him more, and he does. They try to work him into being a point guard. I don't think he is, but maybe they do. And we see him running that point position with Vassell being a primary initiator. I think there's a potential for that. The 2 per-minute monsters on this team are Charles Bassey and Don Barlow. If either of those were to start, you'd look at them as must-roster players. Bassey had a little stretch last season where he was really useful for fantasy, but now these guys are battling to be not only backup center, but like how many minutes do they get, because Vic will play a little bit there. Barlow's on a two-way. I think they should have made him a full-time contract, but their roster's pretty stacked at the moment. And then there is, like, do they keep Birch around? Again, no way, but do they? Or Mamu Kalashvili, does he stay around? Who showed some things as well as a center. But these are the two to watch, especially long-term. I think they both can pair in the front court. Although, again, if they get Alex Sarr, that would be the front court pairing, I would say, next season. But there is upside in both of those players. The depth chart. At guard, Trey Jones, I think, will start. And you've got Blake Wesley, who's just shown horrible efficiency. I'm not sure that he's going to make it as a rotation player. There's Devontae Graham, who we know is horribly inefficient, but can always be a streamer for threes if he plays enough. And there is Serge Rice, who's a pretty interesting shooter as a guard, but he's very one-positional, and he's a two-way contract. On the wings, Devin Vassell, with backups as Branham, Julian Champagny. I'm really interested in Champagny. I think that he could develop into a starter. Whether that's this season or not, it's going to be hard again with Vassell and Keldon ahead of him and Branham getting minutes, but Champagny was very impressive last season and very impressive in Summer League. I'm keeping a very close eye on him. Sidi Sissoko, I don't think is going to play very much this season. And then there's Seth Milner, who they just signed to a two-way deal. For the forwards, I do think it is going to be Sohan that starts over Keldon, but you know that debate. Reggie Bullock and Doug McDermott there as forwards. If they do move on from those guys, they do need more forward depth. And then for the bigs, it's Wembanyama and Zach Collins with Bassey and Barlow behind them. As I said, I do think that Birch and Mamu are in the firing line to get cut at the moment. But maybe someone else gets cut. 3 people need to go. Who else do I have actually getting cut? Oh, Chetty Osman is the other one who I haven't even mentioned. He's on the roster too, and I don't think he's going to make it through. In terms of Durant and Bazemore, Durant actually downgrades Vassell a little bit and downgrades Trey Jones quite a bit, but it bumps Charlie Bassey up. And for Bazemore for Dynasty, Vic's a top 5 player. Vassell's top 50, Sohan's top 70. Trey Jones is outside the top 100, and Charles Bassey is inside the top 150. Probably don't want to know where I've got Keldon Johnson, but again, caveats of how I view him as a player. And that will do it for me today. Don't forget to follow this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on the Odyssey app. Oh, no Stitcher. I'm going to keep making that mistake. YouTube, thumb it up and leave those comments down below. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.
Whose horse is that?